All right, let's do it to it. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of, I guess we're calling it Fraggoth Reads still. Um, if I come up with a better title, I will change it at the drop of a hat. Hopefully a fast hat and not a slow hat. Wow, that's a lot of spam on Discord. Not in our Discord channel. We're fine. Somewhere else that I once moderated on and no longer do. Because nobody goes there anymore. I'm going to just leave that channel. Boom! Okay, so, hi, I'm Fraggoth. I read books. That's the thing I do. I read books. It is my form of screaming into the void, into the algorithmically driven void. Not, unfortunately, the void which binds, which we'll learn more about. If not today, then, oh, I don't know, sometime. Sometime we'll learn more about the void which binds. Certainly in the second Endymion book, we will learn more about it. So, last time, our good friends, Raul, Endymion, Aenea, and Android Betic, met the Chitchatuk, which are a group of people living on the frozen world of Sol Draconi Septem, whose lives generally revolve around trudging across the tundra mile after mile, trudging across the tundra into the parish of St. Alfonso, Father Glaucus, who is a guy who got not so much excommunicated as generally exiled to do his works on, to do Catholic Church work on Sol Draconi Septem. And he's like, well, I don't actually have an interest in proselytizing people and converting them to the faith. I think these guys have it made. They have their culture, and I'm not going to steamroll that. So I'm just going to chill and go snowblind, but we can't have everything. So he's hanging out there too, and the Chitchatuk bring Raul, Aenea, and Betic there to talk to this Father Glaucus guy, and he kind of gives them the skinny on what the Chitchatuk are all about. And they ask, hey, do you know where there's a Farcaster portal? Another one, because we're traveling. And he's like, yeah, sure, it's over that way, like 28 kilometers distant and then under the ice. Unfortunately, you have to go through an area, a territory that is greatly infested with the ice wraiths, which are part of they're central to the existence of the Chitchatuk living on Sol Draconi Septem. And in that they use all the larval Chitchatuks. The Chitchatuk use all the larval ice wraiths, bits and components for all the things that they do. Adult ice wraiths, on the other hand, are another matter entirely. They're very large, very fast, and incredibly deadly. And they're going to be going into their territory. Meanwhile, Father Captain de Soya, after, in the wake of his interrogation by the Inquisition, he is giving he's given a bit of a tweak to his marching orders. His mission to recover Aenea has altered slightly to Aenea Must Die. She is a virus. We cannot let the virus spread. Kill her. We don't... However, he is told, we basically don't think that you have it in you to kill her, because you have a conscience and you're a moral person. So we're assigning you someone else who also has a papal disci. This someone else is named Rhadamnth Nemes. And we're going to learn a bit more about them. We had a nice little sneak peek at Rhadamnth, and now we're going to get right into what this Rhadamnth Nemes individual is all about. Because they are the one who's going to be call them the executrix And with that, let me take a quick sip of water, and we'll get rocking and rolling. "47. It takes less than a minute for Rhadamnth Nemes' neural tap to finish its probe of Father Glaucus's brain. In a combination of visual images, language, and raw synaptic chemical data, Nemes has as full a picture of Aenea's visit to the frozen city as she will get without complete neurological disassembly. She withdraws the microfilament and allows herself a few seconds to ponder the data. Aenea, her human companion, Raul, and the android left 3.5 standard days earlier, but at least one of those days will have been taken up with cutting their raft apart. The second Farcaster is almost 30 clicks to the north, and the Chichatuk will lead them over the surface, which is dangerous and slow traveling. Nemes knows that there is a good chance that Aenea has not survived the surface trek. Nemes has seen in the old priest's mind the crude means by which the indivisible people try to cope with the surface conditions. Rhadamnth Nemes smiles thinly. She will not leave such things to chance. Father Glaucus moans feebly. Nemes pauses with her knee on the old priest's chest. The neural probe has done little harm. A sophisticated medkit could heal the filament bore between the old man's eye and brain. And he was already blind when she arrived. Nemes considers the situation. Encountering a Pax priest on this world had not been part of the equation. As Father Glaucus begins to stir, his bony hands lifting toward his face, Nemes weighs the balance. Leaving the priest alive will pose very little risk. A forgotten missionary, in exile, destined to die in this place anyway. On the other hand, Nemes knows, not leaving him alive poses no risk whatsoever. It is a simple equation. "Who are you?" moans the priest as Nemes easily lifts him and carries him from the kitchen through the dining area, from the dining area through the book-lined library with its warm fuel pellet fire, from the library to the hallway, to the building's central core. Even here lanterns burn to discourage wraiths. "Who are you?" says the blind priest again, struggling in her grip like a 2-year-old in the arms of a strong adult. "Why are you doing this?" says the old man as Nemes reaches the elevator shaft, kicks the plasteel doors open, and holds the priest a final moment. There is a blast of cold air rushing down from the surface to the glacial depths 200 meters below. The noise sounds as if the frozen planet is screaming. At the last second, Father Glaucus realizes precisely what is happening. "Ah, dear Jesus, Lord," he whispers, his chapped lips quivering. "Ah, Saint Teilhard, dear Jesus." Nemes drops the old man into the shaft and turns away, only mildly surprised that no scream echoes behind her. She takes the frozen stairway to the surface, leaping 4 or 5 steps at a time in the weighted G-field.
At the top, she must punch her way up the icy waterfall where the frozen atmosphere has dribbled down 5 or 6 flights of stairs. Standing on the roof of the building, the sky black with vacuum and the Coriolis storm whipping ice crystals at her face, she activates the phase shift field and jogs across the ice to the dropship. There are 3 immature wraiths investigating the ship. In a second, Nemes takes note of the creatures. Non-mammalian, the white fur actually tubuled scales capable of holding gaseous atmosphere, which acts to hold in body heat, eyes working on the deep infrared, redundant lung capacity which allows them to go 12 hours or more without oxygen, each animal more than 5 meters long, forearms powerful, rear legs designed for digging and disemboweling, each beast very fast. They turn toward her as she jogs closer. Seen against the black background, the wraiths look more like immense white weasels or iguanas than anything else. Their elongated bodies move with blinding speed. Nemes considers bypassing them, but if they attack the ship, it could cause complications during takeoff. She shifts into fast time. The wraiths freeze in mid-motion. The blowing ice crystals hang suspended against the black sky. Working efficiently, using only her right hand and the diamond-hard blade of her phase-shifted forearm, she butchers the 3 animals. During the work, 2 things mildly surprise her. Each wraith has 2 huge 5-chambered hearts, and the beasts seem capable of fighting on with only one intact. Each wears a necklace of small human skulls. When she is finished, and has shifted back to slow time, after the 3 wraiths have dropped like giant bags of organic offal to the ice, Nemes takes a moment to inspect the necklaces. Human skulls. Probably from human children. Interesting. Nemes activates the dropship and flies north, keeping it on reaction thrusters since the stubby wings can find no lift in this near vacuum. Deep radar probes the ice until the river becomes visible. Above the level of the river are many hundreds of kilometers of tunnels. The wraiths have been very busy in this area. On the deep radar display, the metal arch of the Farcaster portal stands out like a bright light in dark fog. The instrument is less successful in finding living, moving things under the ice. Various echoes show the clear track of adult wraiths tunneling their way through the atmosphere glacier, but these soundings are clicks to the north and east. She lands the dropship directly above the Farcaster portal and searches the Sestrugi-patterned surface for a cave entrance. Finding one, she moves into the glacier at a jog, dropping her biomorphic field when the pressure moves about 3 psi, and the temperature rises within 30 degrees of freezing. The tunnel maze is daunting, but she keeps her bearings relative to the great mass of portaled metal 1/3 of a kilometer beneath her, and within an hour she is nearing the level of the river. It is too near absolute darkness down there to see by light amplification or infrared, and she has not brought a flashlight, but she opens her mouth, and a brilliant beam of yellow light illuminates the tunnel and ice fog ahead of her. She hears their approach long before the dim ember lanterns come into view down the long descending corridor. Killing the light, Rhadamnth Nemes stands in the tunnel and waits. When they first round the corner, it looks more like a herd of diminutive wraiths than a band of human beings, but she recognizes them from Father Glaucus's memory, Kuchiat's band of Chichatuk. They stop in surprise at the sight of a lone female without robes or outer insulation standing in the glacier tunnel. Kuchiat steps forward and speaks rapidly.
The indivisible people greet the warrior hunter-seeker who chooses to travel in the glow of the next to perfect indivisibility. If you need warmth, food, weapons, or friends, speak, for our band loves all who walk on 2 feet and respect the path of the prime.
In the Chichatuk language she has taken from the old priest, Rhadamnth Nemes says,
I seek my friends, Aenea, Raul, and the Blue Man. Have they passed through the metal arch yet?
The 23 Chichetuk talk among themselves of the strange woman's command of their language. They reason that she must be a friend or kin of the Glaucus, for this person speaks with precisely the same dialect as the blind man in black who shares his warmth with visitors. Still, Kuchiat speaks with something like suspicion.
They have passed under the ice and out of sight through the arch. They wished us well and gave us gifts. We wish you well and offer you gifts. It is the next to perfect indivisibility, wishing to travel the magical riverway with your friends. Is the next to perfect indivisibility, wishing to travel the magical riverway with your friends?
In a moment, says Rhadamnth Nemes with her thin smile.
This encounter offers the same equation as the quandary of what to do with the old priest. She takes a step forward. The 23 Chichetuk exclaim with almost childish delight as she phase shifts into featureless quicksilver. She knows that their ember light reflecting from 1,000 ice facets must be mirrored now on her surface. Shifting into fast time, she kills the 23 men and women without wasting motion or effort. Dropping out of fast time, she chooses the nearest corpse and fires a neural probe through the corner of the man's eye. The brain's neural network is collapsing from lack of blood and oxygen, creating the usual burst of hallucinations and wild creativity common to the death of such networks, human or AI, but in the middle of the life-to-death synaptic replay of birth images, emerging from long tunnels into bright light and warmth, she catches the fading images of the child, the tall man, and the android pushing off the crudely rebuilt raft, ducking their heads as they pass under the low ice beneath the frozen-in-place arch.
Damn, breathes Nemes.
Leaving the bodies piled where they fell in the darkening tunnel, she jogs the last kilometer or so to the level of the river. There is little open water here, and the Farcaster portal is only a brief metal cord in the jagged ice above. Icy fog and mist roil around her as she stands on the low, broad shelf of ice where heat imprints show the Chichetuk had gathered to bid farewell to their friends. Nemes wants to interrogate the Farcaster, but to reach the arch she has either to bore through many meters of ice or climb the overhanging ceiling to the exposed section 20-some meters above. She phase shifts just her hands and feet and climbs, digging steps and handholds deep into the ice. Hanging upside down from the exposed curve of the arch, Nemes sets her hand on a panel and waits until the frosted metal folds back on itself like skin being pulled back from a wound. Extending both microfilaments and a fiber-optic probe, she contacts the interface module that puts her in touch with the actual Farcaster. Whispers impinging directly upon her auditory nerve tell her that the 3 sectors of consciousness are monitoring her and discussing events. All during the centuries of the hegemony of man, everyone knew that there were hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, of techno-core-created Farcaster portals, from the smallest doorway to the largest river Tethys arches to the huge spaceborne portals. Everyone was wrong. There is only one Farcaster portal, but it is everywhere. Using the interface module, Rhadamnth Nemes queries the pulsing, living warmth of the true Farcaster within its camouflage disguise of metal, electronics, and fusion field. For centuries, humans jumping by Farcaster within the web, at its height, one human analyst suggested that there were more than 1 billion jumps a second taking place, had served the ultimates, those elements of the technocore who existed to create a more advanced AI, the ultimate intelligence whose consciousness would absorb the galaxy, perhaps the universe. Every time a human had accessed the fat line-connected dataspheres or Farcast during those web days, the human being's synapses and DNA had added to the computing power of the web-wide neural net the core had built. The core had cared nothing for humankind's visceral urge to move about, to travel without energy expenditure or time-lapse, but the Farcaster web had been the perfect bait to weave the very fabric of those teeming hundreds of billions of primitive organic brains into something useful. Now, its hiding place in the interstices of space-time ferreted out by Mina Gladstone and her damned Hyperion pilgrims, its web within the web home attacked by the Death Wand device the Corps had helped humanity to build, its fat line connections severed by powers from somewhere beyond the known circle of the megasphere, all facets of the single, omnipresent Farcaster portal are dead and useless. Except this one. It has just been used. The interface module reports to Nemes what she and all the sectors already know. The facet had been activated by something else. From somewhere else. The portal still registers its connection points in real space-time in its bubble memory of modulated neutrinos. Nemes accesses this memory. Aenea and the others have Farcast to Comriad. Nemes must ponder another puzzle. She can lift the dropship to the Archangel Raphael and be in Comriad's system within a few minutes. But she will have to interrupt de Soya's and the others' resurrection cycle to do so, as well as come up with a plausible explanation as to the reason for the shift. In addition, Comriad is a Pax quarantined system. Officially listed as having been overrun by the Ousters, it is one of the early Justice and Peace projects. As had been the case with Hebron, neither the Pax nor its advisors can allow de Soya and his men to see the truth the planet represents. Finally, Nemes knows that the river Tethys runs for only a few kilometers, crossing through the Red Rock Desert of the southern hemisphere and passing the Grand Mosque in Mashhad. If she allows Raphael's resurrection cycle to run its course, de Soya and the others will not be active for 3 standard days, allowing Aenea and her raft of misfits time to pass the length of the section of Tethys. Once again, the equation seems to demand that Nemes finish de Soya and the others and press on alone. But her instructions have been to avoid that possibility unless absolutely necessary. De Soya's involvement with the final capture of the One Who Teaches, the Aenea threat, has been registered in too many full simulations, recorded in too many full sector looks forwards. Recorded in too many full sector looks forward, to be ignored without hazard. The fabric of space-time is much like one of the elaborate Vatican tapestries, thinks Nemes, and she who begins pulling on loose threads does so at the peril of watching the whole tapestry ravel. Wouldn't it be unravel? Nemes takes several seconds to consider this. Finally, she extends a neural network filament deeper into the interface module's synapses. All of the Farcaster's activation route is there, past and present. The memory pattern of Aenea and her accomplices is a fleeting bubble memory, but Nemes can easily see the recent past and future openings. There are only 2 more downriver possibilities in the foreseeable future. After Comriad, the something else has structured these portals to open only onto God's Grove, and then... Nemes gasps and withdraws the microfilament before the full import of the last activation can sear her. That last is obviously Aenea's goal, or more precisely, the goal of the something else who opens the way for her, and it is inaccessible to both the Church Pax and the 3 sectors. But the timing will be about right. Nemes can keep de Soya and his men alive while jumping ahead to the God's Grove system. She has already thought of a plausible explanation. Assuming 2 days to transit Comriad and another full day on the river system on God's Grove, she will still be able to intercept the raft and do what she has to do before de Soya's resurrection. She will even have an hour or two to tidy up, so that when she drops to God's Grove with the priest captain and Swiss Guard commandos, there will be nothing visible except signs that the child and her friends have passed that way and Farcast on. Nemes withdraws her probe, jogs to the surface, takes the dropship to the Raphael, erases any record in the ship's computer that she has awakened or used the dropship, plants a false message in the ship's computer, and crawls into her resurrection creche to sleep. While in Pachem system, she had removed the creche from the resurrection system and rewired the telltales to simulate activity, and now she lies back in the humming coffin and closes her eyes. The jumps to fast time and the use of the phase shift skin in such quantities tires her. She welcomes the rest before Soya and the others arise from death. Remembering that detail with a smile, Rhadamnth Nemes activates a phase shift glove and touches her chest between her breasts, reddening and rearranging the skin there into the simulation of a cruciform. She carries no such parasite, of course, but the men in the ship may glimpse her naked, and she has no intention of revealing anything through a stupid lapse of attention to detail. The Raphael continues to orbit the glaring ice world of Sol Draconi Septem, while 3 of its crew lie in their crash coffins, the monitoring lights and telltales recording their slow climb up from death. Their other passenger sleeps. She does not dream. Good morning to you, Frank Misers, although I guess it's not morning for either of us. 48. Thanks for tuning in. As we floated through the desert world, blinking in the harsh light of the G2 sun and drinking water from the air/water wraith gut pouches we had brought with us, our final couple of days on Sol Draconi Septem seemed like a quickly fading dream to me. Kuchiat and his band had passed 50-some meters beneath the surface. We had noticed the air getting noticeably thinner in the tunnels, and there, in the jagged ice corridor, we had prepared for our expedition. To our amazement, the Chichatuks stripped naked. Even while glancing away in embarrassment, we noticed how muscular and solid their bodies were, the women as well as the men, as if a bodybuilder on a 1G world had been flattened and compressed into a more compact specimen. Kuchiat and the female warrior Chachia came over to supervise our own undressing in preparation for the surface, while Chiaku and the others pulled items from their hide packs. We watched the Chichatuk and followed their lead in dressing, with help from Kuchiat and Chachia. For the few seconds that we were actually naked, standing on the wraith robes we had been wearing so that our feet would not freeze, the cold burned at us. Then we pulled on a thin membrane material, an inner skin of the wraith, we later learned, that had been tailored for arms and legs and head. But obviously for smaller arms and legs and head. As it was, the membrane was tighter than skin tight. The translucent skin hugged me so firmly that I must have looked like so many cannonballs stuffed into a sausage skin. Abetic looked no better. I realized after a moment that these must be the Chichatuk equivalent of pressure suits, perhaps even of the sophisticated skin suits the hegemony military once used in space. The membranes passed sweat and provided much of their own heating and cooling while serving well to keep the lungs from exploding in vacuum, the skin bruising, or the blood boiling. The membranes pulled low over our foreheads and up to our chins like a cowl, leaving our eyes, noses, and mouths uncovered. Kuchiat and Chachia removed membrane masks from the pack. The other Chichatuk had already donned theirs. These were obviously created things. The mask itself was made of the same inner skin as the pressure suit, with wraithhide padding sewn in here and there. The eyepieces were made from the outer lenses of the wraith eyes, offering the same limited access to the infrared as our outer robe eyes. From the snout of the mask ran a length of coiled wraith intestine, the end of which Kuchiat carefully sewed into one of their water bags. Not just a water bag, I realized, as the Chichatuk began breathing through their masks. The fuel pellet brazier melted the glacier ice into both water and atmosphere gas. They had somehow filtered this atmosphere mix until they had adequate quantities of breathable air. I tried breathing through the mask. My eyes watered from the other compounds there, definitely a hint of methane and perhaps even of ammonia, but breathable. I guessed that there must only be a couple of hours of air in the bag. With our G-suit skins on, we donned the outer layers of wraith robes. Kuchiat pulled the heads of the robes lower than we had ever worn them before, locking the teeth shut so we were peering through the lenses, the head acting as a crude helmet above our pressure suit. We then donned an outer pair of wraithhide booties, which laced up our calves almost to the knee. The outer robe was then quickly stitched shut, with a few bold strokes from Chiaku's bone needle. The water bag and air bag hung from straps beneath our robes, near a flap that could be unstitched and opened quickly when the bags needed to be refilled. Chichtaku, our fuel pellet fire carrier, was constantly busy melting atmosphere into water and air, even as we hiked, and he handed the replacement skin bags out in precise order, from Kuchiat first to me last. At least I now understood the band's pecking order. I also understood why. When danger threatened on the surface, the band moved into a protective circle with Chichtaku, the fire carrier, in the center. It was not just that he held religious and symbolic importance. His constant vigilance and labors kept us alive. There was one final addition to our wardrobe as we emerged from the cave onto the whirling wind and surface ice. From a cache near the entrance, Chiaku and the others retrieved a store of long black skate blades, sharp as razors on the bottom, flat and broad on top where our bootied feet fit quite nicely. Once again, the wraith-hide thongs were used to lash us to the blades. The things were an effective combination of skates and cross-country skis, and I awkwardly skated 10 meters across the patterned ice of the glacier before I realized that we were skiing on wraith claws. I admit that I had a great fear of falling in 1.7 G, since every tumble felt like the equivalent of 7/10 of another Raul Endymion falling on top of me, but we soon got the hang of movement on the things, and we were well padded for falls. I ended up using one of the cut-up logs from the raft as a plump ski pole when the surface got too rough, poling myself along as if I were a one-man raft. I'll confess here that I wish I had a holo image or photograph of our party on that outing. With our wraith hides, inner skin G-suits, wraith gut airbags, lower intestine air hoses, bone spears, my plasma rifle, packs, and claw skis, we must have looked like some old Earth Paleolithic astronauts. It all worked. We moved more quickly across the ice and ice crystal sastrugi than we had in the ice tunnels. When the wind blew from the south, which it did during only a short part of our surface trek, we could spread our wraith-robed arms and be propelled across flat sections of the ice like sailing ships. Walking the surface of Sol Draconi Septem's frozen atmosphere had a harsh but memorable beauty to it. The sky was vacuum and moon surface black when the sun was up, but an instant after sunset many thousands of stars seemed to explode into existence. Our robes and inner suits handled the near-space high and low temperatures well during the day, but it was obvious that even the Chichatuk could not survive the cold at night. Luckily, we moved quickly enough across the surface that we had only one 6-hour... Excuse me. Gosh golly gee willikers. Luckily, we moved quickly enough across the surface that we had only one 6-hour darkness period to shelter from, and the Chichatuk had planned our departure so that we got the benefit of a full day's sunlight before that nightfall. There were no mountains or other surface features larger than ice ridges or rills, except for our first few hours on the ice when the rising sun struck an icy object far to the south of us. This, I realized, was the tip of Father Glaucus's skyscraper protruding from the ice many kilometers away. The surface was so featureless that I wondered for a minute how the Chichatuk were managing to navigate, but then I saw Kuchiat glancing at the sun and then at his own shadow. We continued skating north during the brief day. The Chichatuk moved in a tight defensive pattern as they skated/skied, with the fire carrier and medicine man, who tended the fire and air-water bags in the center, warriors with ready spears on the wings, Kuchiat in the lead, and Chiaku, obviously second in command, we realized now, bringing up the rear and skating almost backward in his vigilance. Each Chichatuk had a length of wraith rope wrapped around his or her robe. They had wound some around the three of us when we were dressed, and I better understood the purpose of all that line after Kuchiat stopped abruptly and skated to the east to avoid several crevasses that had been invisible to my eye. I looked down one of these. The rift seemed to drop into eternal darkness, and I tried to imagine what that fall would be like. It was late the same afternoon that one of the outriders disappeared in a sudden, silent burst of ice crystals, only to reappear a moment later as Chiaku and Kuchiat were readying rescue ropes. The warrior had arrested his own fall and then pulled off his black claw skates, and was now using them as climbing tools, hacking his way up the sheer wall of the crevasse like a technical climber on an ice fall. I was learning not to underestimate the Chitchatuk. We saw no wraiths that first day. As the sun set, we realized, through our exhaustion, that Kuchiat and the others had ceased skating north and were circling, peering down into the ice as if looking for something. All this while the thin winds lashed ice crystals against us. If we had been on the surface in spacesuits, I am convinced that the visor would have been scratched and marred. The wraith robes and eye lenses showed no damage. Finally, Aichakut waved his arms from where he had skated far to our west. There was no verbal communication through masks and vacuum, and we all skated in that direction, eventually stopping at a place that looked no different from all the rest of the pressure-rippled surface. Kuchiat waved us back, untied our gift of the axe from where he had lashed it onto his back, and began chopping at the ice. When the surface layer broke away, we could see that this was not another crevasse or rill, but the narrow entrance to an ice cave. 4 of the warriors readied their spears. Chichtaku joined them with his ember lamp, and, with Kuchiat leading, the group crawled into the hole while the rest of us waited in a defensive circle. A moment later, Kuchiat's robed head emerged, and he waved us in. He still held the axe, and I could imagine him grinning broadly behind his wraith teeth visor and membrane mask. The axe had been an important gift. We spent the night in the wraith den. I helped Chiaku caulk the entrance with snow and ice. We packed another meter of the entrance tunnel with loose ice crystal and larger fragments, and then we went in to watch Chichtaku heat blocks of snow ice until the ice den was filled with enough atmosphere to breathe. We slept bundled together, the 23 indivisible people and the 3 indivisible travelers, still wearing our robes and pressure membranes but masks removed, breathing the welcome scent of each other's sweat. Our huddled warmth kept us alive through the terrible night outside as the Coriolis storms blasted ice crystals at nearly the speed of sound, had there been any sound in that near vacuum. I remember one other detail about our last night with the Chitchatuk. The wraith den was lined, completely lined, with human skulls and bones, each set into the circular ice wall of the den with what seemed to be an artist's care. We saw no wraiths, cubs or ice-boring adults, during our next day's travel, and shortly before sunset we doffed and cached our skates, then entered the ice tunnels above the second Farcaster. When we were deep enough to be in captured atmosphere again, we removed the masks and pressure suit membranes, handing them back to Chachia with something like reluctance. It was as if we were surrendering our membership badges to the indivisible people. Kuchiat spoke briefly. I could not follow the quick syllables, but Aenea translated. "We were lucky. Something and something about how unusual it is not to have to fight wraiths when crossing the surface. But, he says, luck on one day almost always leads to bad luck the next." "Tell him I hope that he's wrong," I said. The open river with its floating mist and ice ceiling was almost a shock to see. Even though everyone was exhausted, we set to work at once. Assembling the shortened raft was difficult with wraith mittens on, but the Chitchatuk worked quickly to help, and within 2 hours we had a cut-down, awkward version of our earlier vessel, minus the foremast, tent, and hearthstone. But the steering oar was in place, and although the push-poles were shorter and clumsy-looking when lashed together, we thought they should work on this shallow stretch of the Tethys. The leave-taking was sadder than I would have imagined. Everyone hugged everyone else at least twice. There was ice on Aenea's long lashes, and I had to admit a strain of powerful emotion in my own throat. Then we were shoving off into the current. It felt strange to be traveling while standing still. I still had the push and glide motion of the claw skates echoing in my muscles and mind. The Farcaster portal and ice wall approached. We ducked under the even lower ledge of ice, and suddenly we were elsewhere. We poled into sunrise. The river was wide and unruffled here, the current slow but steady. The riverbanks were of red rock, striated like wide, gradual steps climbing up from the water. The desert was red rock with small yellow shrubs. The distant slabs of hill and arch were also of smooth red stone. All this redness was ignited by the huge red sun rising to our left. The temperature was already 100 degrees above what it had been in the ice cave. We shielded our eyes and pulled off our wraith robes, setting them like thick white rugs near the stern of the shortened raft. Layers of ice on the logs first glistened and then melted in the morning sun. We decided that we were on Comriad even before consulting the Comlog or Tethys guidebook. It was the Red Rock Desert that cued us. Bridges of the bright red sandstone, fluted columns of red rock rising against the pink sky, delicate red arches dwarfing the receding Farcaster portal. The river ran through canyons overarched by these red stone parabolas, and then curved into a wider valley where the hot wind blew the yellow sage and raised a red grit that caught in the long tubular hairs of the wraith robes and lodged in our mouths and eyes. By midday we were moving through a more fertile valley. Irrigation canals ran at right angles from our river, and short yellow palms and magenta bottle brushes lined the waterways. Soon small buildings came into sight, and shortly after an entire village of pink and ochre homes, but no people.
"It's like Hebron,"
whispered Aenea. "We don't know that," I said. "Maybe they're just working out of sight somewhere." But midday heated to mid-afternoon. Comriad had a 22-hour day, according to the guidebook, and although the canals proliferated, plants multiplied, and villages became more common, there was no hint of humans or their domestic animals. We poled the raft ashore twice, once to draw water from an artesian well, and again to explore a small village from which sounds of hammering could be heard on the river. It was a broken awning banging in the desert wind. Suddenly Aenea doubled over with a cry of pain. I dropped to one knee and swept the empty street with the plasma pistol as Betic ran to her side. There was no one on the street. The windows were empty of movement.
"It's all right," the girl gasped as the android held her. "A sudden pain."
I jogged to her, feeling foolish for having drawn the weapon. Setting it in my belt holster, I went to one knee and held her hand. "What's the matter, kiddo?" She was sobbing.
"I don't know," she managed between sobs. "Something terrible I don't know."
We carried her back to the raft.
"Please,"
whispered Aenea, her teeth chattering despite the heat.
"Let's go. Let's get out of here."
Betic set up the micro-tent, even though it now took up most of our abbreviated craft. We pulled the wraith robes into the shade, laid the girl on them, and gave her water from one of the water bags. "Is it this village?" I said. "Did something about it—"
"No,"
said Aenea between dry sobs. I could see her fighting the waves of emotion that were crashing over her.
"No, something awful. This world, but also behind us."
"Behind us?" I looked out the door of the tent and upriver, but there was nothing but the valley, the wide canal of a river, and the receding village with its wind-tossed yellow palms. "Behind us on the ice world?" Betic asked softly.
"Yes,"
managed Aenea before doubling up with pain.
"Ooh, it hurts."
I laid my palm on her forehead and bare stomach. Her skin was hotter than it should have been, even accounting for the heat of the valley and the day's sunburn on her face and arms. We pulled one of the medkits from my backpack, and I set a diagnostic patch in place. It showed a high fever, pain in the 6.3 range of the dolorometer. Dolorometer. Oh, Lord. Like someone who's dolorous. Or it could be named after someone named Dolores, but I think it's Dolorous. It showed a high fever, pain in the 6.3 range of the dolorometer, muscle cramps, and an uneven EEG. It recommended water, ibuprofen, and contacting a doctor. "There's a city," said the android as the river rounded a bluff. I stepped out of the tent to see. The rose-red towers, domes, and minarets were still far away, perhaps 15 kilometers across the widening valley floor, and the current on this river was in no hurry. "You stay with her," I said, and moved to the starboard side to pole. Our shortened raft was considerably lighter than the old one, and we moved quickly with the current. Yes, I too like that cover art. It's I have it written down somewhere who did it. I'll look it up in a minute when we're done. Remind me to look it up when we finish for today. That one's a good one. Easily on a par or better than the Norioshi Orai Japanese cover art, which is my second favorite. Vibrant, colorful, and then it's split between technically 4 volumes. So you have like some interesting overlapping patterns or continuation patterns. So like one side reads to the next, reads to the next. It's very cool. But this one, yeah, it just nails the Farcaster for sure. I'm very fond of this cover art. This being the clean cover art without the title and text. New word. Sounds stupid, but can't be worse than 6-7. I don't know which word that was. Sestrugi? Chichatuk? Who knows? A. Betic and I consulted the water-warped guidebook and decided that the city was Mashhad, the capital of the southern continent and home of the Grand Mosque, whose minarets we could see clearly now as the river moved through thickening villages, suburbs, industrial areas, and into the city proper. Aenea was sleeping fitfully. Her temperature had risen, and the medkit diagnostic was blinking red lights to suggest a doctor's intervention. Mashhad was as eerily empty as New Jerusalem had been. I seem to remember rumor that the Comriad system had fallen to the ousters about the same time they took the coal sack, I said. A. Betic agreed, saying that they had monitored PAX radio traffic to that effect from the university city. We tied the raft up at a low pier, and I carried the girl into the shade of the city streets. This was a replay of Hebron, only this time I was the healthy one and the girl unconscious. I made a mental note to avoid desert worlds from now on if I could help it. The streets were less tidy than New Jerusalem had been, ground cars parked at odd angles and left abandoned on the sidewalks. One sec. Sorry about that. Sneeze out of nowhere.
Sinus is doing strange things. Oh no.
Here we go. I made a mental note to avoid desert worlds from now on if I could help it. The streets were less tidy than New Jerusalem had been, ground cars parked at odd angles and left abandoned on the sidewalks, detritus blowing in the streets, windows and doors open to the red sand, and strange little carpets lying on sidewalks, streets, and dying lawns. I paused at the first cluster of rugs we encountered, thinking that they might be hawking mats. They were only rugs, and they were all oriented in the same direction. "Prayer mats," said A. Betic as we moved back into the shade of the city street. Even the tallest buildings were not overly tall here, none as high as the minarets which looked out from a park area with tropical trees. The population of Comriad was almost 100% Islamic, he continued. The Pax was said to have found no inroads here, even with the promise of resurrection. The people wanted nothing to do with the Protectorate. I turned the corner, still hunting for a hospital or any sign that might lead us to one. Aenea's hot forehead was against my neck. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. "I think this place was in the Cantos," I said. The child seemed to weigh nothing. A. Betic nodded. M. Silenus wrote of Colonel Kassad's victory over the so-called New Prophet here some 300 years ago. "The Shiites took power again once the web fell, didn't they?" I said. We looked down another side street. I was looking for a red crescent rather than the universal Red Cross sign of medical help. "Yes," said A. Betic, "and they have been violently opposed to the Pax. The supposition was that they had welcomed the ousters when the Pax fleet retreated from this sector." I looked at the empty streets. "Well, it looks like the ousters didn't appreciate the welcome. This is like Hebron. Where do you think they've all gone? Could they have taken an entire planetary population hostage and—" "Look, a caduceus," interrupted A. Betic. I am using the archaic Latin hard C. I've heard it pronounced with a soft C. It is the stick with snakes. Gesundheit. Oh yes, that is a silly word. Also, thank you. "The age-old symbol—" "Look, a caduceus," interrupted A. Betic. The age-old symbol of a winged staff wrapped with two entwined serpents was on the window of a tall building. The interior was littered and tossed about, but it seemed more a standard office building than any sort of hospital I had been in. A. Betic walked to a digital sign that was scrolling lines of text in Arabic. It was also muttering in a machine voice. "Do you read Arabic?" I said. "I do," said the android. "I also understand some of the spoken language, which is Farsi. There is a private clinic on the 10th floor. I would think that it would have a full diagnostic center and perhaps an autosurgeon." I headed for the stairway with Aenea in my arms, but A. Betic tried the elevator. The empty glass shaft hummed, and a levitation car floated to stop at our level. "Uncanny that the power's still on," I said. We rode the lift to the 10th floor. Aenea was awakening and moaning as we walked down the tiled hallway, across an open terrace garden where yellow and green palms rustled in the wind, and into an airy, glassed-in room with banks of autosurgeon beds and centralized diagnostic equipment. We chose the bed closest to the window, stripped the child to her underwear, and laid her between the clean sheets. Replacing the medkit diagnostic patches with patch filaments, we waited for the diagnostic panels. The synthesized voice was in Arabic and Farsi, as was part of the display readout, but there was a web English band we switched to it. The autosurgeon diagnosed exhaustion, dehydration, and an unusual EEG pattern, which might have resulted from a serious blow to the head. A. Betic and I looked at each other. Aenea had received no blow to the head. We authorized treatment for the exhaustion and dehydration and stepped back as flow foam restrainers extruded from the bed panels. Pseudo-fingers felt for Aenea's vein, and an IV was started with a sedative and saline solution. Within minutes the child was sleeping easily. The diagnostic panel spoke in Arabic, and A. Betic translated before I could walk over to read the monitor. "It says that the patient should have a good night's sleep and be better in the morning." I shifted the plasma rifle from where I had been carrying it on my back. Our dusty Pax sat on one of the visiting chairs. Moving to the window, I said, "I'll check out the city before it gets dark. Make sure we're alone." A. Betic folded his arms and watched the great red sun touch the tops of the buildings across the street. "I think that we are very much alone," he said. "It took a little longer here, is all." "What took longer?" "Whatever it was that stole the people. On Hebron there was no sign of panic or struggle. Here people had time to abandon their vehicles. But the prayer rugs are the surest sign." I noticed for the first time that there were fine wrinkles in the blue skin of the android's forehead and around his eyes and mouth. "Surest sign of what?" I said. "They knew that something was happening to them," said Aebetic, "and they spent their last minutes in prayer." I set the plasma rifle next to the visitor's chair and unclipped the flap over my holster. "I'm still going to take a look," I said. "You watch her in case she wakes, okay?" I pulled the 2 comm units out of my pack, tossed one to the android, and clipped the other onto my collar, with the bead mic in place. "Leave the common frequency open. I'll check in. Call me if there's a problem." Aebetic was standing by her bedside. His large hand gently touched the sleeping girl's forehead. "I will be here when she wakes, Endymion." It is odd that I remember that evening's walk through the abandoned city so clearly. A digital sign on a bank said that it was 40 degrees centigrade, 104 Fahrenheit, but the dry wind from the Red Rock Desert quickly carried away any perspiration, and the pink and red sunset had a calming effect on me. Perhaps I remember that evening because it was the last night of our voyage before things changed forever. Mashhad was a strange mixture of modern city and bazaar from 1001 Arabian Nights, a wonderful series of stories Grandam used to tell me as we sat under Hyperion's starry sky. This place had a musky hint of romance about it. On the corner there would be a news kiosk and automatic banking machine, and as soon as one turned the corner, there would be stalls in the middle of the street with brightly striped awnings and heaps of fruit rotting in bins. I could imagine the din and movement here, camels or horses or some other pre-Hejra beasts milling and stamping, dogs barking, sellers shouting and buyers haggling, women in black chadors and lacy burqas or veils gliding by, and on either side the baroque and inefficient ground cars growling and spewing out filthy carbon monoxide or ketones or whatever dirty stuff the old internal combustion engines used to pour into the atmosphere. I was shocked out of my reverie by a man's voice calling musically, the words echoing down the stone and steel canyons of the city. It seemed to be coming from the park only a block or 2 to my left, and I ran in that direction, holding my hand on the grip of my pistol in the unbuttoned holster as I went. "You hear this?" I said into the bead mic as I ran. "Yes," came Aebetic's voice in my earplug. "I have the door to the terrace open, and the sound is quite clear here." "It sounds Arabic. Can you translate?" I was panting only slightly as I finished the 2-block sprint and came out into the open park area where the mosque dominated the entire block. A few minutes before, I had looked down one of the connecting streets and glimpsed the last of the red sunset painting the side of one of the minarets, but now the stone tower was a dull gray, and only the highest wisps of cirrus caught the light. "Yes," said Aebetic, "it is a muezzin call to evening prayer." I pulled the binoculars from my belt pouch and scanned the minarets. The man's voice was coming from loudspeakers on a balcony encircling each tower. There was no sign of movement there. Suddenly the rhythmic cry ended, and birds chattered within the branches of the forested square. "It is most probably a recording," said Aebetic. "I'll check it out." Setting away the binoculars, I followed a crushed stone path through the extensive lawns and yellowish palm trees to the mosque's entrance. I passed through a courtyard and paused at the entrance to the mosque proper. I could see the interior. It was filled with hundreds of the prayer mats. Elaborate arches of striped stone were supported by elegant pillars, and on the far wall a beautiful arch opened on a semicircular niche. To the right of this niche there was a flight of steps guarded by a lovingly carved stone railing, and a stone canopied platform at the top. Not yet entering the large space, I described it to Aebetic. "The niche is the mihrab," he responded. "It's reserved for the prayer leader, the imam. The balcony to the right of it is the minbar, the pulpit. Is there anyone in either place?" "No." I could see the red dust on the prayer rugs and stone steps. "Then there is no doubt that the call to prayer was a timed recording," said Aebetic. I had the urge to enter the great stone space, but the urge was cancelled by my reluctance to profane anyone's sacred house. I had felt this as a child in the Catholic cathedral at Beak's End, and as an adult when a friend in the Home Guard wanted to take me to one of the last Zen Gnostic temples on Hyperion. I had realized when I was a boy that I would always be an outsider when it came to holy places, never having one of my own, never feeling comfortable in another's. I did not enter. Walking back through the cooling and darkening streets, I found a palm-lined boulevard through an attractive section of town. Pushcarts held food and toys for sale. I paused by a cart selling fried dough and sniffed one of the bracelet-sized dough rings. It had gone bad days, not weeks or months, ago. I'm going to reread that with the right emphasis. It had gone bad days, not weeks or months, ago. The boulevard came out by the river, and I turned to my left, taking the riverside esplanade back to the street that would lead me once again to the clinic. Occasionally I checked in with Aebetic. Aenea was still sleeping soundly. The stars were dimmed by dust in the atmosphere as night settled on the city. Only a few of the downtown buildings had lights on. Whatever had stolen the populace must have happened in the daytime, but stately old street lamps ran the length of the esplanade, and they were glowing with gaslight. If it had not been for one of the lamps at the street end of the pier where we had tied the raft, I probably would have turned back toward the clinic without seeing it. As it was, the lamplight allowed me to spot it from more than 100 meters away. Someone was standing on our raft. The figure was motionless, very tall, and seemed to be wearing a silver suit. Lamplight gleamed from the figure's surface as if it were wearing a chrome spacesuit. Whispering to Aebetic to guard the girl that there was an intruder on the raft, I pulled my pistol from my holster and the binoculars from my belt. The second I focused the glasses, the gleaming silver shape turned its head in my direction. "49. Father Captain de Soya awakens in the familiar warmth of Raphael's creche. After a few moments of inevitable confusion and disorientation, he pulls himself from the enclosed couch and drifts, naked, to the command console. Things are as they should be. In orbit around Sol Draconi Septem, the world a blinding white sphere just beyond the command console's windows, the breaking burn optimum, the other 3 creches close to reawakening their valuable human cargo, the internal field set to 0G until they all reacquire strength, internal temperature and atmosphere optimum for reawakening, the ship in proper geosynchronous orbit. The priest captain gives his first command of this new life. He orders the ship to begin brewing coffee for all of them in the wardroom cubby. Usually his first thought upon resurrection is of his coffee bulb, tucked in the plotting table/wardroom table niche, filling with the hot black drink. Then de Soya notices the ship's computer flashing a priority message light. No message had arrived while he was conscious in Pachem system, and it seems unlikely that one has found them here in this remote X-colony system. There is no Pax presence in Sol Draconi Septem, in Sol Draconi's system. At most, transiting torch ships use the 3 gas giants in the system for refueling their hydrogen tanks, and a brief query of the ship's computer confirms that no other ship was contacted during the 3 days of braking and orbit insertion. The same query brings forth the fact that there is no church mission on the planet below them, the last missionary contact lost more than 50 standard years ago. De Soya plays the message. Papal authority routed through Pax fleet. According to the display codes, the message arrived mere hundredths of a second before Raphael had gone quantum in Pachem space. It is a text-only message in brief. His Holiness Countermand's mission to Sol Draconi Septem. New area of acquisition. God's Grove. Proceed there immediately. Authorization Lord Dusami and Marusin. Message ends. De Soya sighs. This trip, these deaths and resurrections, have been for nothing. For a moment the priest captain does not move, but sits naked in the command couch, pondering the glaring white limb of the ice planet that fills the curved window above him. Then he sighs again and moves off to shower, stopping by the wardroom cubby to take his first sip of coffee. He reaches out automatically for the bulb while he taps commands into the shower cubby console. Needle spray, as hot as he can stand it. He makes a note to find some bathrobes somewhere. This is no longer an all-male locker room. Suddenly, De Soya freezes in irritation. His questing hand has not closed on the handle of his coffee bulb. Someone has shifted the bulb in its niche.
Now, why would I go? Oh, Twitchbot. Why would I go to a place ending in to a website called smmtop53.ru? Why would I go there? Ah, for viewers? I don't think they're hiding there. I think you're lying to me. I think Mr. Prigozhin would have a word.
Actually, Mr. Prigozhin is probably the one that set up the bot to do that. May he rest in... well, he's dead now. Shame about that plane accident. Where were we? Oh, yes. The gag there, gag if you can call it that, black humor that it is Mr. Prigozhin, formerly of Russian military mercenary fame, in the Ukraine campaign, the ongoing Ukraine altercation, or whatever we're calling it today. Before his infamous march on Moscow, and before the Ukrainian campaign, he had a bunch of bot farms that he would rent out for various purposes. So anytime you're Twitch streaming and someone gives you a .ru link, think of Mr. Prigozhin, and think of the aircraft that he was on that accidentally crashed sometime after he marched on Moscow. Their new recruit, Corporal Rhadamnth Nemes, is the last to leave her creche. All three of the men avert their eyes as she leaves her creche and kicks off for the shower wardrobe cubby, but there are enough reflective surfaces in Raphael's crowded command bubble for each of them to catch a glimpse of the small woman's firm body, her pale skin, and the livid cruciform between her small breasts. Corporal Nemes joins them in taking communion and seems disoriented and vulnerable as they sip their coffee and allow the internal fields to build to 1/6 G. "Your first resurrection?" De Soya asks gently. The corporal nods. Her hair is very black and cut short, the bangs hanging limply on the pale forehead. "I'd like to say that you get used to it," says the priest captain, "but the truth is, every awakening is like the first one. Difficult and exhilarating." Nemes sips her coffee bulb. She seems tentative in the microgravity. Her crimson and black uniform makes her skin seem all the more pale in contrast.
"Shouldn't we be leaving immediately for the God's Grove system?"
she says tentatively. "Soon enough," says Father Captain De Soya. "I've instructed Raphael to break orbit here in 15 minutes. We'll accelerate out to the closest that's the same line. Crap. We'll accelerate out to the closest translation point at 2 Gs so we can recover for a few hours before we have to go back to the couches and the creches." Corporal Nemes appears to shudder a bit at the thought of another resurrection. As if eager to change the subject, she glances at the blinding limb of the planet filling the windows and view screen.
"How can anyone be traveling a river on all that ice?"
"Under it, I'd think,"
said Sergeant Gregorius. The giant trooper has been watching Nemes carefully.
"'Tis the atmosphere that's frozen there against since the fall."
Let me try that again so I actually enunciate.
'Tis the atmosphere that's frozen there since the fall.
Oh my god. We're struggling. It's the struggle. I'm sorry, this is not that hard. There's a line break that's just breaking my brain.
Under it, I'd think,
says Sergeant Gregorius. The giant trooper has been watching Nemes carefully.
'tis the atmosphere that's frozen there again since the fall. The Tethys must flow beneath it.
Corporal Nemes raises a dark eyebrow in surprise.
And what is God's Grove like?
You don't know it? Asks Gregorius. I thought everyone in the packs had heard of God's Grove.
Oh, lordy. One sec. Wow, nice. Printer software tried to hijack my computer. That's cool. Well, it didn't do anything. Probably. Oh, I know what happened there. I'm not going to explain what happened there, but I know. Now I know.
I thought everyone in the packs had heard of God's Grove.
Nemes shakes her head.
I grew up on Esperance. It's a farming and fishing world mostly. Mostly, people there don't pay too much interest in other places. Not other worlds of the packs. Not old stories of the web. Most of us are too busy scraping a living from the land or sea.
God's Grove is the old Templar world, says Father Captain de Soya, setting his coffee bulb in its niche in the plotting table. It was burned pretty badly during the Ouster invasion preceding the fall. In its time, it was beautiful.
Aye, nods Sergeant Gregorius. The Templar Brotherhood of the Muir was a sort of nature worship cult. They turned God's Grove into a world forest, trees taller and more beautiful than the redwoods and sequoias of old Earth. The Templars lived there, all 20-some million of them, in cities and platforms in those lovely trees. But they chose the wrong side in the war.
Corporal Nemes looks up from sipping her coffee.
You mean they were on the Ouster's side?
She sounds shocked at the idea.
That they were, lass, says Gregorius. Perhaps it was because they had space-going trees in those days.
Nemes laughs. It is a short, brittle sound. He's serious, says Corporal Key. The Templars used eggs, energy binders from Aldebaran, to encapsulate the trees in a Class 9 containment field and provide a reaction drive in system. They even had regular Hawking drives installed for interstellar flight.
Flying trees,
says Corporal Nemes, and laughs harshly again. Like a psychopath.
Some of them flew off in such trees when the Outsters paid back their allegiance with a swarm attack on God's Grove, continues Gregorius. But most of them burned, just as most of the planet burned. For a century, they say, most of the world was ash. The clouds of smoke created a nuclear winter effect.
Nuclear winter?
Says Nemes. De Soya is watching the young woman carefully, wondering why one so naive has been chosen to carry the papal disci under certain circumstances. Was the ingenuousness part of her strength as a killer, should the need arise? Corporal, he says, speaking to the woman, you say you grew up on Esperance. Did you join the Home Guard there? She shakes her head.
I went directly into the Pax Army, Father Captain. There was a potato famine. The recruiters offered off-world travel, and, well...
Where did you serve? Asks Gregorius.
Just training on Freeholm, says Nemes.
Gregorius leans on his elbows. The 1/6 G makes sitting easier.
Which brigade?
The 23rd, says the woman. 6th Regiment.
The Screaming Eagles, says Corporal Key. I had a female buddy who transferred there. Was Commander Coleman your CO? Nemes shakes her head again.
Commander Deering was in charge while I was there. I just spent 10 local months. About 8.5 standard, I guess. I was trained as a general combat specialist. Then they asked for volunteers for the 1st Legion.
She trails off as if this is classified material. Gregorius scratches his chin.
It's odd I haven't heard of this outfit in the building. Nothing stays secret very long in the military. How long did you say you were training with this legion?
Nemes gives the big man a direct stare.
2 standard years, Sergeant, and it has been secret until now. Most of our training was on Lee 3 and the Lambert Ring territories.
Lambert, muses the big sergeant. So you've had your share of low G and zero G training.
More than my share, agrees Corporal Rhadamnth Nemes with a thin smile. While in the Lambert Ring, we trained in the Peregrine Trojan cluster for 5 months.
Father Captain de Soya feels the conversation turning into an interrogation. He does not want their new crewmate to feel assaulted by their questions, but he is as curious as Key and Gregorius. Besides that, he feels something not right. So the Legion's job will be pretty much like the Marines, he says, ship-to-ship fighting? Nemes shakes her head.
Captain. Not just zero-G combat tactics for ship-to-ship. The legions are being formed to take the war to the enemy.
What does that mean, Corporal? Asks the priest captain softly. In all my years in the fleet, 90% of our battles were in Ulster territory.
Yes, says Nemes, her small smile returning, but we hit and run. Fleet actions. The legions will occupy.
But most of the asteroidins are in vacuum, says Key. Asteroids, orbital forests, deep space itself.
Exactly, says Nemes, her smile remaining. The legions will fight them on their own ground, or vacuum, as the case may be.
Gregorius catches de Soya's glance, saying, "No more questions." But the sergeant shakes his head and says,
Well, I don't see what these vaunted legions are learning that the Swiss Guard hasn't done, and done well, for 16 centuries.
De Soya floats to his feet. "Acceleration in 2 minutes. Let's get to our couches. We'll talk more about God's Grove and the mission there during our drive to the translation point." It had taken Raphael almost 11 hours of braking deceleration at 200 gravities to kill its near-light speed upon entry into the system, but the computer has located an adequate translation point to God's Grove only 35 million clicks out from Sol Draconi Septem. The ship could accelerate at a leisurely 1G, and reach that point in around 25 hours, but de Soya has ordered it to lift out of the planet's gravity well at a constant 2Gs for 6 hours, before using more energy to bring on the internal fields during the last hour's dash at 100 Gs. When the fields finally come up, the team goes through their final checklist for God's Grove. 3 days to resurrect, then immediate dropship deployment with Sergeant Gregorius in charge of the ground party, surveillance of the 58th Click River Tethys segment between portals. Surveillance of the 58 Click River Tethys segment between portals, and then final preparation for the capture of Aenea and her party.
After all this, why does His Holiness start directing us in this search?
Asks Corporal Key as they move to their creches. Revelation, says Father Captain de Soya. Okay, everyone tuck in. I'll watch the boards. For the last few minutes before translation, it has been their custom to close their creches. Only the captain stays on watch. In the few minutes he has alone at the command board, de Soya quickly calls up the records of their abortive entry and escape from Hebron's system. He had viewed these before their departure from Pachem system, but now he fast-forwards through the visual and data records again. It's all there, and it all seems correct. The shots from orbit around Hebron while he and his 2 troopers were still in creche, the burning cities, cratered landscape, and shattered villages of Hebron lifting smoke into the desert atmosphere, New Jerusalem in radioactive ruins, and then the radar acquisition by 3 swarm cruisers. Raphael had aborted the resurrection cycles and made a run for it, lifting out of the system at the 280 gravities her enhanced fusion drive could provide with her cargo of dead men. The ousters, on the other hand, had to divert energy to their internal fields or die, no resurrection for heathens, and could never muster more than 80 Gs during the stern chase. The visuals were there, though, the long green tails of the ouster fusion drives, their attempts to lance Raphael at a distance of almost a full AU, the ship's record of the defense fields easily handling the lance energy at that distance, the final translation to Mare Infinitus system, since that was the closest jump point. It all made sense. The visuals were compelling. De Soya did not believe a bit of it. The father captain was not sure why he was so skeptical. The visual records meant nothing, of course. For more than 1,000 years, since the beginning of the digital age, even the most compelling visual images could be faked by a child at a home computer. But ship's records would require a gigantic effort, a technical conspiracy, to falsify. Why should he not trust Raphael's memory now? With only a few minutes before translation, De Soya calls up the records of their recent descent into Sol Draconi Septem's system. He glances over his shoulder from the command couch. All 3 creche couches are sealed and silent, their telltales green. Gregorius, Key, and Nemes are still awake, waiting for translation and death. De Soya knows that the sergeant prays during these last minutes. Key usually reads a book from his creche monitor. De Soya has no idea what the woman is doing within her comfortable coffin. He knows he is being paranoid. My coffee bulb was moved out of place. The handle was shifted sideways. During his hours awake, De Soya has tried to remember whether someone might have been in the wardrobe cubby and jarred the bulb in Pachem's system. No, they had not used the wardrobe cubby during the climb out of Pachem's gravity well. The woman, Nemes, had been aboard before the others, but De Soya had used the coffee bulb and returned it to its place after she had gone to her couch/creche. Her couch creche. He was sure of that. He had been the last to turn in, just as he always was. Acceleration or deceleration might smash bulbs not designed for terrible gravities, but the deceleration vector Raphael had been following was linear along the courier ship's line of travel and would not have moved things laterally. The coffee bulb niche was designed to hold things in place. Father Captain De Soya is part of a millennia-long line of sailors, sea and space, who become fanatic about a place for everything and everything in its place. He is a spacer. Almost 2 decades of serving in frigates, destroyers, and torch ships have shown him that anything he leaves out of place will literally be in his face as soon as the ship goes to 0G. More important, he has the age-old sailor's need to be able to reach out and find anything without looking, in darkness or storm. Granted, he thinks, the alignment of the handle of his coffee bulb is not a major issue. Except it is. Each man has learned to use one of the chair niches at the 5-person plotting table that doubles for the mess table in the crowded command pod. When they are using the table to plot courses or view planetary maps, each of the men, Rettig included when he was alive, had sat or stood or floated at their usual places at the table. It was human nature. It was second nature to spacers to keep their habits neat and predictable. Someone had tapped his coffee bulb handle out of alignment, perhaps with a knee nestled there in 0G to hold her, in place. Paranoid. Definitely. In addition, there had been the troubling news whispered to him by Sergeant Gregorius in the minutes between that man's emergence from the resurrection crash and Corporal Nemes's awakening.
A friend of mine in the Swiss Guard in the Vatican, Captain. I had a drink with him the night before we left. He knew us all, Key and Rettig, and he swore he saw Lancer Rettig being carried unconscious on a litter to an ambulance outside the Vatican infirmary.
Impossible, De Soya had said. Lancer Rettig died of resurrection complications and was buried in space while in Mare Infinitus space.
Aye, Gregorius had growled, but my friend was sure, almost sure, that it was Rettig in the ambulance. Unconscious, life support packs attached, oxygen mask and all, but Rettig.
That makes no sense. DeSoya had said. He had always been suspicious of conspiracy theories, knowing from personal experience that secrets shared by more than two people rarely stayed secrets for long. Why would Pax Fleet and the Church lie to us about Rettig? And where is he, if he was alive on Pachem?
Gregorius had shrugged. Maybe it wasn't him, Captain. That's what I've been telling myself. But the ambulance.
What about it? DeSoya had snapped, more sharply than he had intended.
He was headed for Castel Sant'Angelo, sir,
said Gregorius.
Headquarters for the Holy Office.
Paranoia. The records of the 11 hours of deceleration are normal. High G braking, the usual 3-day resurrection cycle, ensuring the maximum chance for their safe recovery. DeSoya glances at the orbital insertion figures and runs the video of Sol Draconi Septem's slow rotation. He always wonders at those lost days, Raphael carrying out her simple tasks, while the creches revive him and the others. He wonders at the eerie silence that must fill the ship.
3 minutes until translation, comes Raphael's crude synthesized voice. All personnel should be in creche couches.
DeSoya ignores the warning and calls up data files on the 2.5 days the ship spent in orbit around Sol Draconi Septem before he and the others regained life. He is not sure what he is looking for. No record of dropship deployment, no sign of early life support activation, all creche monitors reporting the regular cycle, the first quickenings of life in the last hours of the 3rd day, all orbital ship records normal.
Wait!
2 minutes until translation, says the ship's flat voice.
There, on the 1st day, shortly after attaining standard geosynchronous orbit, and there again about 4 hours later. Everything normal except the dry details of 4 small reactor thruster firings. To attain and hold a perfect geosynchronous orbit, a ship like Raphael will fire dozens of little thruster tweaks such as these. But most such fine-tunings, DeSoya knows, involve the large reaction thruster pods on the stern near the fusion drive, and on the command pod boom at the bow of the awkwardly configured courier ship. These thruster burps were similar. First, a double firing to stabilize the ship during a roll so the command pod was facing away from the planet. Normal during rotisserie mode to spread the solar heating uniformly against the ship's surface without using field coolant. But only 8 minutes here and here. And after the roll, those paired reaction tweaks. 2 and 2. Then the final paired burps, which might accompany the larger thruster firings that would roll the ship back with the command pod cameras aimed down at the planet. Then, 4 hours and 8 minutes later, the entire sequence again. There are 38 other station-keeping thruster sequences on the record, and none of the major thruster firings that would signify a roll of the entire ship stack, but these twin 4-burp interludes stand out to DeSoya's trained eye.
1 minute until translation,
warns Raphael. DeSoya can hear the huge field generators beginning to whine in preparation for the shift to the modified Hawking system that will kill him in 56 seconds. He ignores it. His command chair will carry his dead body to the creche after translation if he does not move now. The ship is designed that way. Messy, but necessary. Father Captain Federico DeSoya has been a torch ship captain for many years. He has made more than a dozen Archangel courier jumps. He knows that double burp, roll, double burp signature on a reaction thruster record. Even with the actual roll event deleted from the ship's records, the fingerprint for the maneuver is there in outline. The roll is to orient the dropship, which is tied down on the opposite side of the command pod cluster, to the planet's atmosphere. The second double burp, the one still on record here, is to counteract the propellant squids separating the dropship from the center of Raphael's mass. The final double firing is to stabilize the stack once the ship has returned to normal altitude, command pod cameras trained on the planet below once again. None of this is as obvious as it sounds, since the entire stack is slowly rotating in rotisserie mode during the entire time, occasional tweaks aligning the stack for better heating or cooling purposes. But to DeSoya, the signature is unmistakable. He taps directions to bring up the other records again. Negative sign of dropship deployment. Negative record of dropship deployment roll maneuver. Positive indicators of constant dropship attachment. Negative sign of life support activation prior to everyone's resurrection a few hours before. Negative images of the dropship moving toward atmosphere on video records. Constant image record of dropship attached and empty. The only anomaly is 2 8-minute thruster tweak sequences 4 hours apart. 8 minutes of roll away from the planet would allow a dropship to disappear into atmosphere without main camera visual record, or to reappear and rendezvous. Boom cameras and radar would have recorded the event unless commanded to ignore it prior to dropship separation. That would have required less tampering with the record after the fact. If someone had ordered the ship's computer to delete all records of dropship deployment, Raphael's limited AI might have altered the record in just such a way, not realizing that the small thruster firings during the rotisserie mode would leave any... Okay. If someone had ordered the ship's computer to delete all records of dropship deployment, Raphael's limited AI might have altered the record in just such a way, not realizing that the small thruster firings during rotisserie mode would leave any footprint. And for anyone less experienced than a 12-year torch ship captain, it would not have. If Soya had an hour or so to call up all the hydrogen fuel data, cross-check against dropship refueling needs and system entry requirements, then double-check with the Bussard hydrogen collector input during deceleration, he would have a better idea if the main stack roll maneuvers and dropship deployment had occurred. If he had an hour or so to himself.
30 seconds until translation.
Soya does not have time to reach his creche couch. He does have time to call up a special command sequence for ship operations, tap in his override code, confirm it, change monitor parameters, and do it twice more. He has just heard the confirmation acknowledgement on the third override when the quantum leap to Archangel C+ occurs. The translation literally tears Soya apart within the confines of his couch. He dies, grinning fiercely. Soya says, "Someone is re-yanking my chain, and I do not appreciate it." 50. Raul! It was at least an hour before Comriad's sunrise. Both Aebetic and I were sitting in chairs in the room where Aenea slept. I had been dozing. Aebetic was awake, as he always seemed to be, but I reached the girl's bedside first. The light from the biomonitor readouts over the bed was the only illumination. Outside, the dust storm had been howling for hours. Raul. The readouts said that her fever was down, pain was gone, that only the erratic EEGs remained. Right here, kiddo. I took her right hand in mine. Her fingers no longer felt feverish. You saw the Shrike? This caught me by surprise, but I realized in a moment that it did not have to be by prescience or telepathy at work here. This caught me by surprise, but I realized in a moment that it did not have to be prescience or telepathy at work here. I had radioed Aebetic about the sighting. He must have had the comm unit speakers on, and Aenea had been awake enough to register it. Yeah, I said, but it's okay. It's not here. But you saw it. Yes. She gripped my hand with both of hers and sat up in bed. I could see her dark eyes gleaming in the faint light. Where, Raul? Where did you see it? On the raft. I used my free hand to push her back onto the pillows. The pillowcase and her undershirt were soaked with sweat. It's all right, kiddo. I didn't do anything. It's all right, kiddo. It didn't do anything. It was there when I left. Did it turn its head, Raul? Did it look at you? Well, yes, but... I stopped. She was moaning softly, her head thrashing back and forth on the pillow. Kiddo, Aenea, it's all right. No, it's not, said the girl. Ah, God, Raul, I asked him to come with me that last night.
Did you know that I asked him to come along? He said no."
"Who said no?" I asked. "The Shrike?" Aebetic came up behind me. Outside, the red sand chafed at the windows and sliding door.
"No, no, no,"
said Aenea. Her cheeks were moist, although whether it was from tears or her fever breaking, I did not know.
"Father Glaucus,"
she said, her voice almost lost under the wind noise.
"That last night I asked Father Glaucus to come with us. I shouldn't have asked him, Raul. It was not part of my dreams. But I did ask, and if I asked, I should have insisted."
"It's all right," I said, pushing a damp tendril of hair off her brow. "Father Glaucus is all right."
"No, he's not," said the girl, and moaned softly. "He's dead. The thing that's chasing us killed him. Him and all the Chichaduk."
I looked at the monitor board again. It still showed improvement from the fever, despite her ravings. I looked at Aebetic, but the android was staring intently at the child. "You mean the Shrike killed them?" I said.
"No, not the Shrike,"
she said slowly, and laid her wrist against her lips.
"At least I don't think so. No, it wasn't the Shrike."
Suddenly she gripped my hand in both of hers.
"Raul, do you love me?"
I could only stare a moment. Then, not withdrawing my hand, I said, "Sure, kiddo. I mean..." Aenea seemed to really look at me then for the first time since she had come awake and called my name.
"No, stop," she said.
She laughed softly.
"I'm sorry. I came unglued in time for a minute. Of course you don't love me. I forgot who we were to each other now."
"No, it's all right," I said, not understanding. I patted her hand. "I do care for you, kiddo. So does Aebetic, and we're going to—"
"Hush,"
said Aenea. She freed her hand and set one finger against my lips.
"Hush. I was lost for a moment. I thought we were us. The way we're going to—"
She lay back deeper in the pillows and sighed.
"My God, it's the night before God's Grove. Our last night traveling."
I was not sure if she was making sense yet. I waited. Aebetic said, Aenea, is God's Grove our next destination on the river?"
"I guess so,"
said the girl, sounding more like the child I knew.
"Yes, I know. Yes, I don't know. It all fades."
She sat up again.
"It's not the Shrikes chasing us, you know, nor the packs."
"Of course it's the packs," I said, trying to get her to make contact with reality. "They've been after us since—" Aenea was shaking her head adamantly. Her hair hung in damp tendrils.
"No," she said softly but very firmly. "The Pax is after us because the Corps tells it we're dangerous to them."
"The Corps?" I said. "But ever since the fall, it's been—"
"Alive and dangerous," said Aenea. "After Gladstone and the others destroyed the Farcaster system that provided the Corps with its neural net, it retreated. But it never went far, Raul. Can't you see that?"
"No," I said, "I can't. Where's it been if it didn't go far?"
"The Pax," the girl said simply. "My father, his persona in Mother's Shrone Loop, explained it to me before I was born. The Corps waited until the church began being revitalized under Paul de Rey, Pope Teilhard I. De Rey was a good man, Raul. My mother and Uncle Martin knew him, but he carried 2 cruciforms, his own and Father Lenar Hoyt's. But Hoyt was weak."
I patted her wrist.
"But what does this have to do with—" "Listen," said the girl, pulling her arm back. "Anything can happen tomorrow on God's Grove. I can die. We can all die. The future is never written, only penciled in. If I die but you survive, I want you to explain to Uncle Martin, to whoever will listen."
"You're not going to die, Aenea."
"Just listen,"
pleaded the girl. There were tears in her eyes again. I nodded and listened. Even the wind howls seemed to abate.
"Teilhard was murdered in his 9th year. My father predicted it. I don't know if it was by Technocore agents, they used cybrids, or just Vatican politics, but when Lenar Hoyt was resurrected from their shared cruciforms, the core acted. It was the core that provided the technology of allowing the cruciform to revive humans without the sexlessness or idiocy visited on the Bikura tribe on Hyperion. But how? I said. How could the Technocore AIs know how to tame the cruciform symbiote? I saw the answer even before she spoke. They created the cruciforms, said Aenea. Not the current core, but the UI they create in the future. It sent the things back in time on Hyperion just as it did the time tombs, tested the parasites on the lost tribe, the Bikura, saw the problems. Little problems, I said, like resurrection destroying reproductive organs and intelligence. Yes, said Aenea. She took my hand again. The core was able to correct those problems with their technology. Technology they gave the church under its new pope, Lenar Hoyt, Julius VI. I began to understand. A Faustian bargain, I said. The Faustian bargain, said the girl. All the church had to do to gain the universe was sell its soul. And thus the Pax Protectorate was born, Aebetic said softly. Political power through the barrel of a parasite. It's the core that's after us, after me, continued the child. I'm a threat to them, not just to the church. I shook my head slowly. How are you a threat to the core? You're one child. One child who was in touch with a renegade cybrid persona before I was born, she whispered. My father was loose, Raul, not just in the datasphere or the megasphere, but in the metasphere. Loose in the wider psycho-cybernet that even the core was terrified of.
Actually, it says psycho-cybernet, which might be a mistype, but I don't know.
Loose in the wider psycho-cybernet that even the core was terrified of.
Lions and tigers and bears, muttered Aebetic.
Exactly, said Aenea. When my father's persona penetrated the core megasphere, he asked the AI, Uman, what the core was afraid of. They said that they didn't range farther than in the metasphere because it was full of lions and tigers and bears.
I don't get it, kiddo, I said. I'm lost. She leaned forward and squeezed my hand. Her breath on my cheek was warm and sweet.
Raul, you know Uncle Martin's cantos. What happened to the Earth?
Old Earth? I said stupidly. In the cantos, the AI Uman said that the three elements of the Technocore were at war. We talked about this.
Tell me again.
Uman told the Keats persona, your father, that the volatiles wanted to destroy humanity. The Stables, his group, wanted to save it. They faked the black hole destruction of old Earth and spirited it away to the Magellanic Clouds. The Ultimates, the third group, didn't give a damn what happened to old Earth or humanity as long as their ultimate intelligence project came to fruition. Aenea waited. And the Church agrees with what everyone else believes, I continued somewhat lamely, that old Earth was swallowed by the black hole and died when it was supposed to have died.
Which version do you believe, Raul?
I took a breath. I don't know, I said. I'd like old Earth to still exist, I guess, but somehow it doesn't seem that important.
What if there was a third possibility?
Said Aenea. The glass doors suddenly rattled and shook. I put a hand on the plasma pistol, half expecting the Shrike to be scratching at the glass. Only the desert wind howled there. A third possibility, I said.
Uman lied, said Aenea. The AI lied to my father. No element of the core moved the Earth, not the Stables, not the Volatiles, not the Ultimates.
So it was destroyed, I said.
No, said Aenea. My father did not understand then. He did later. Old Earth was moved to the Magellanic Clouds all right, but not by any element of the core. They didn't have the technology or the energy resources or that level of control of the void which binds. The core can't even travel to the Magellanic Cloud. It's too far, unimaginably distant.
Who then? I said. Who stole old Earth? Aenea laid back on the pillows.
I don't know. I don't think the Corps knows either. But they don't want to know, and they're terrified that we'll find out.
Aebetic stepped closer. So it is not the Corps that is activating the Farcasters on our voyage?
No, said Aenea.
Will we find out who is? I said.
If we live, said Aenea. If we live.
Her eyes looked tired now, not feverish.
They'll be waiting for us tomorrow, Raul. And I don't mean that priest captain and his men. Someone, something from the Corps will be waiting for us.
The thing you think killed Father Glaucus, Kuchiat, and the others? I said.
Yes.
Is this some sort of vision? I said. To know about Father Glaucus, I mean.
Not a vision, said the girl in an empty voice. Just a memory from the future. A certain memory.
I looked out at the diminishing storm. We can stay here, I said. We can get a skimmer or EMV that works, fly to the northern hemisphere, and hide in Ali or one of the bigger cities that the guidebook talks about. We don't have to play their game and go through that Farcaster portal tomorrow.
Yes, said Aenea, we do.
I started to protest, and then remained silent. After a while I said, And where does the Shrike come in?
I don't know, said the girl. It depends upon who sent it this time. Or it could be acting on its own. I don't know.
On its own? I said. I thought it was just a machine.
Oh, no, said Aenea. Not just a machine.
I rubbed my cheek. I don't understand. It could be a friend?
Never a friend, said the girl.
She sat up and put her hand on my cheek where I had rubbed it a second before.
I'm sorry, Raul. I don't mean to talk in circles. It's just that I don't know. Nothing's written. Everything's fluid. And when I do get a glimpse of things shifting, it's like watching a beautiful sand painting in the second before the wind gets it.
The last of the desert storm rattled the windows as if to demonstrate her simile. She smiled at me.
I'm sorry I got unstuck in time a while ago.
Unstuck? I said.
That bit about your loving me, she said with a rueful smile. I forget where and when we are.
After a moment I said, It doesn't matter, kiddo. I do love you, and I'll die before I let anyone hurt you tomorrow. Not the church, not the Corps, not anyone.
And I also will strive to prevent such an eventuality, Aenea, said Aebetic.
The girl smiled and touched both our hands.
The Tin Woodsman and the Scarecrow, she said. I don't deserve such friends.
It was my turn to smile. Grandam had told me that old story. Where's the Cowardly Lion? I said. Aenea's smile went away.
That's me, she said very quietly. I'm the cowardly one.
None of us slept any more that night. We loaded up and went down to the raft when the first hint of dawn touched the red hills beyond the city. Yeah, the Shrike thing gets even worse. Like, it's baffling and nonsensical now. It's going to get a lot weirder. It was weird before. There was still room for it to kind of fill a lot of these different roles, but it's like in Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion. But now it's like they're at it. Dan Simmons adds on a whole order of magnitude of complexity and confusion to the issue, which makes sense in context. There's some timey-wimey fuckery occurring. One sec, somebody's shooting me love notes and I need to... Oh, one sec, I gotta take this. Bear with me a moment. There we go.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, the Shrike situation gets decidedly convoluted. After reading through it a bunch of times, I have a moderate handle on what's going on, but I can't talk about it now. I can't really talk about it until like the end of the second book, because there's a bunch of stuff they're going to throw at you in between then and there. That's some of which is like borderline retconned within just the Endymion portion, but there's a lot of everything you thought you knew is or can be wrong from the previous, and part of that has to do with the wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey nature of the narrative being told. Come on, I just dealt with this. Okay, one sec. Sorry about that. Science! We're almost done with today's segment, so it's okay. Little bit of a shorter one this week, today and tomorrow, but we will be at the end of the first Endymion volume, and then we'll get into the the rise of Endymion. What I do find interesting about Endymion as compared to Hyperion is that both books are ultimately road trip books, which is kind of why it's like that's the consistent through line, but everything surrounding them is kind of like 50-50. I think the first two books of the Hyperion Cantos stand extremely well on their own. Endymion does just enough what everything you thought you knew is wrong that it sort of rubs me a little bit the wrong way, I guess. But I do ultimately like the story that it tells. I'll try and explain what I believe has gone on when we get to the relevant point, particularly with regards to the Shrike, which is, it's confusing deliberately because its role in the narrative and its origin story even changes a bit depending on certain timeline constraints. They're going to talk about this a little bit, but some of it is supposition on my part. I'll try and lay out what I think is going on there. All right. I think this is the last chapter. Well, no, we got 2 short chapters left. 51. More water, please. Oh! But the Shrike is a particularly confusing situation. I will leave it up to other people to decide if they find the ending of The Rise of Endymion satisfying. 51. Because of Raphael's relatively low velocity at the translation point in Sol Draconi Septem, she has less speed to kill while spinning down into God's Grove space. The deceleration is mild, never more than 25 Gs, and lasts only 3 hours. Rhadamnth Nemes lies in her padded resurrection creche and waits. When the ship slides into its orbit around the planet, Nemes opens her coffin door and kicks off to the wardrobe cubby to suit up. Before leaving the command pod for the dropship tube, she checks the creche monitors and makes a direct connection to ship's operations. The other 3 creches are functioning normally, programmed for the nominal 3-day revival period. By the time Soya and his men are awake, Nemes knows this issue will have been settled. Using the microfilament connection to the ship's main computer, she sets the same programming directives and recording overrides she had used in Sol Draconi Septem. The ship acknowledges the coming dropship roll program and prepares to forget it. Before kicking up the tube to the dropship airlock, Nemes taps the combination for her private locker. Besides a few changes of clothes and some false personal items, holos of family and some forged letters from her fictional brother, the only thing in the locker is an extra belt with the usual pouches. Someone examining those pouches would find only a playing card computer of the kind available at any convenience store for 8 or 10 florins, a spool of thread, 3 vials of pills, and a packet of tampons. She slides the belt around her waist and heads for the dropship. Even from orbit at 30,000 kilometers, God's Grove, where it is visible at all through the heavy cloud layers, reveals itself as the damaged world it is. Rather than being divided into discrete continents and oceans, the planet has tectonically evolved as a single landmass, with thousands of long, salty sea locks raking across the landscape like claw marks on a green baize billiard table. Baize? B-A-I-Z-E? Okay, that's a new one on me. Even though I've read this I don't know how many times now. 4? Besides the sea locks and countless finger lakes following the fault lines through the verdant land masses, there are now thousands of brown slash marks where the Ouster invasion, what the humans still think of as the Ouster invasion, had lanced and relanced the peaceful land almost 300 years ago. As the dropship hurtles through the atmosphere entry and ionization, ripping into the solid atmosphere with a triple sonic boom, Nemes looks down at the landscape coming into sight from beneath the extensive cloud masses. Most of the 200-meter-tall recombinant redwood and sequoia forests that had originally attracted the Brotherhood of the Muir to this world are gone, burned away in the planet-wide forest fire that had brought on the nuclear winter. Large segments of the northern and southern hemispheres still glare white from the snowfall and glaciation, which only now is beginning to abate as the cloud cover recedes from a 1,000-click band on either side of the equator. It is precisely this recovering equatorial region that is Nemes's destination. Taking over manual control of the lifting body dropship, Nemes clips in her filament jack. She rifles through the planetary maps she has downloaded from Raphael's main library. There it is. The River Tethys had once run some 160 clicks, primarily west to east, around the roots of God's Grove World Tree and past the Muir Museum. Nemes sees that most of the Tethys tour had been in a giant semicircular arc as the river winds around a small bight of the northern circumference of World Tree. The Templars had fancied themselves the ecological conscience of the hegemony, always inserting their unsolicited opinion into any terraforming effort in the web or outback, and the World Tree had been the symbol of their arrogance. Indeed, the tree had been unique in the known universe, with a trunk diameter of more than 80 kilometers and a branch diameter of more than 500 clicks, equal to the base of Mars's legendary Olympus Mons. The single living organism had thrust its upper branches into the fringes of space. It is gone now, of course, shattered and burned by the Ouster fleet that slagged the entire planet just before the fall. Instead of the glorious living tree, there is now only the world stump, a heap of ash and carbon looking like the eroded remains of an ancient shield volcano. With the Templars gone, killed or fled in their erg-powered tree ships on the day of the attack, God's Grove has lain fallow for more than 2.5 centuries. Nemes knows that the Pax would have recolonized the world long ago if the Corps had not ordered them to desist. The AIs have their own long-term plan for God's Grove, and it does not involve missionaries and human colonies. Nemes finds the upriver Farcaster portal, looking tiny compared to the ashy slopes of the world stump to the south, and hovers above it. Secondary growth has come up along the river and on the eroded ash slopes there, looking like mere weeds compared to the old forests, but still boasting trees 20 meters and more in height, and Nemes can see the occasional tangle of thick undergrowth where the sunlight strikes the gullies. Not a good place for an ambush. Nemes lands the dropship on the north bank of the river and walks to the Farcaster arch. Discarding an access panel, she finds an interface module and peels off the human flesh on her right hand and wrist. Carefully storing the skin for her return to Raphael, she jacks directly into the module and reviews the data. This portal has not been activated since the fall. Aenea's group has not yet passed this way. Nemes returns to the dropship and flies downriver, trying to find the perfect spot. It should be a place where they cannot escape by land, enough forest growth to conceal her and her traps, but not so much as to give Aenea and her companions cover. And, finally, a place where Nemes can clean up the mess after it is all over. She would prefer a rocky surface, something easy to hose down before returning to Raphael. She finds the perfect spot only 15 clicks downriver. The Tethys enters a rocky gorge at this point, a series of rapids created by the Auster slagging and subsequent avalanches. New trees have grown up along the ash slopes by the entrance to this stretch of rapids and along the narrow ravines feeding into it. The narrow canyon itself is bordered by tumbled boulders and by great slabs of black lava that had flowed downhill during the Auster slagging and formed into terraces as they cooled. The rough terrain makes a portage impossible, and anyone piloting a raft toward these rapids will be intent upon guiding their craft into white water, and will have little time to watch the rocks or riverbanks. She lands the dropship a click to the south, pulls a vacuum-locked specimen bag from the EVA locker, tucks it into her belt, conceals the dropship under branches, and jogs quickly back to the river. Nemes removes the spool of thread from her kit, tosses away the thread, and extrudes several hundred meters of invisible monofilament. She runs back and forth across the river above the rapids like an unseen spider's web, spreading clear, sap-like polycarbon goo on the landward side of objects where she loops the wire, both to give her a visual reference and to prevent the monofilament from slicing through trees and boulders wherever it touches them. Even if someone were hiking the boulders and lava fields here, the goo would show up only as a faint line of sap or as lichen on the rocks. The monofilament web would slice through Raphael in a dozen places if someone tried to drive the spaceship through here now. When she has woven the monofilament trap, Nemes moves upriver along the only flat shelf of land, opens her pill case, and spreads several hundred mini claymores on the ground and in the trees there. The chameleon-polymered microexplosives immediately blend in color and texture with the surface on which they have fallen. Each claymore will leap toward the walking or running target before it explodes, and its blast is shaped to burrow inward. The claymores are triggered by the proximity of pulse, carbon dioxide exhalations, and body heat, as well as by the pressure of footstep within 10 meters. Nemes assesses the terrain. This flat area is the only section of riverbank near the rapids where a person on foot can retreat, and with the claymores scattered there, nothing on foot will survive. Nemes jogs back to the boulder field and activates the claymore's sensors with a coded pulse. To prevent someone from swimming back upriver, she breaks open the tampon casings and seeds the river bottom with ceramic-encased earwig eggs. These lie on the river bottom looking exactly like the water-worn pebbles around them. If someone then tries to return upriver, the gnat-sized earwigs will burst through their ceramic eggs and scream through water or air to bore into their target's skull, exploding into a mass of wiry filaments only after making contact with brain tissue. Waiting on a boulder 10 meters above the rapids, Rhadamnth Nemes lies back to wait. The two items left in her belt are the playing card computer and the specimen bag. The computer is the most advanced item she has brought on this hunting trip. Called the Sphinx Trap by those entities that created it for her, named after the Sphinx tomb on Hyperion, which had been designed by the same species of AIs, the card is capable of creating its own 5-meter bubble of anti-entropic or hyper-entropic tides. The energy needed to create this bubble could power a crowded planet such as Renaissance Vector for a decade, but Nemes needs only 3 minutes of temporal displacement. Fingering the flat card, Nemes thinks that it should be called the Shrike Trap. The short woman with the skinless hand looks upriver. Any time now. Even though the portal is 15 clicks away, she will have some warning. Nemes is sensitive to the Farcaster distortion. She expects the Shrike to be with them and anticipates that it will treat her as an adversary. Indeed, she would be disappointed if the Shrike were not there and adversarial. Rhadamnth Nemes fingers the last item on her belt. The specimen bag is just what it appears to be, a vacuum-locked EVA specimen bag. In it, she will transport the girl's head back to the Raphael, where she will store it in the secret locker behind the fusion drive access panel. Her masters want proof. Smiling slightly, Nemes lies back on the black lava, shifts her position so the afternoon sun warms her face, covers her eyes with her wrist, and allows herself to take a brief nap. Everything is ready. "52. I admit that I expected the Shrike to be gone when we reached the riverfront street of Mashhad on Comriad just before the dawn of that last, fateful day. It was not gone. We all stopped in our tracks at the sight of the 3-meter-tall chrome and blade sculpture on our little raft. The thing was standing just as I had last seen it the night before. I had backed away warily then, rifle raised, and now I took another wary step closer, rifle raised.
Easy, said Aenea, her hand on my forearm.
What the hell does it want? I said, slipping off the safety on the rifle. I levered the first plasma cartridge into the firing chamber.
I don't know, said Aenea, but your weapon won't hurt it.
I licked my lips and looked down at the child. I wanted to tell her that a plasma bolt would hurt anything not wrapped in 20 centimeters of web-era impact armor. Aenea looked pale and drawn. There were dark circles under her eyes. I said nothing. Well, I said, lowering the rifle a bit, we can't get on the raft while that thing's there. Aenea squeezed my arm and released it.
We have to.
She started walking toward the concrete pier. I looked at A. Betic, who seemed no happier at this idea than I was. Then we both jogged to keep up with the girl. Close up, the Shrike was even more terrifying than when seen from a distance. I used the word sculpture earlier, and there was something sculpted about the creature, if one can imagine a sculpture done in chromed spikes, razor wire, blades, thorns, and smooth metal carapace. It was large, more than a meter taller than I was, and I am not short. The actual form of the thing was complicated. Solid legs with joints sheathed in thorn-studded bands, a flat foot with curved blades where the toes should be, and a long spoon-shaped blade at the heel, which might be a perfect utensil for disemboweling. A complicated upper carapace of smooth chromed shell interspersed with bands of razor wire, arms that were too long, too jointed, and too many. There was an extra pair tucked under the longer upper set of arms, and 4 huge bladed hands hanging limply by the thing's side. The skull was mostly smooth and strangely elongated, with a steam shovel jaw set in with row upon row of metal teeth. There was a curved blade on the creature's forehead and another high up on the armored skull. The eyes were large, deep-set, and dull red.
You want to get on the raft with that thing?
I whispered to Aenea as we stood 4 meters away on the pier. The Shrike had not turned its head to watch us as we approached, and its eyes seemed as dead as glass reflectors, but the urge to back away from the thing and then turn and run was very strong.
We have to get on the raft, the girl whispered back. We have to get out of here today. Today is the last day.
Without really taking my eye off the monster, I glanced at the sky and buildings behind us. With the night's wild dust storm, one would have expected the sky to be pinker, with more sand in the air, but the storm seemed to have cleared the air a bit. While reddish clouds still stirred on the last desert breeze, the sky above was bluer than it had been the day before. Sunlight was just touching the tops of the taller buildings now. Maybe we could find a working EMV and travel in style, I whispered, the rifle raised. Something without this type of hood ornament. The joke sounded lame even to my ear, but it took most of the bravado I had that morning to attempt any joke at all. "Come on," whispered Aenea, and went down the iron ladder off the pier and onto the battered raft. I hurried to keep up with her, one hand keeping the rifle trained on the chrome nightmare, the other grasping the old ladder. Aebetic followed us without a word. I had not paid attention to how battered and flimsy the raft seemed. The abbreviated logs were torn and splintered in places, water came over the forward third and lapped around the shrike's huge feet, and the tent was filled with red sand from the night's storm. The steering oar assembly looked as if it would give way any second, and the gear we had left aboard had an abandoned look to it. We dropped our packs into the tent and stood indecisively, watching the back of the shrike and waiting for movement. 3 mice who had crawled onto the sleeping cat's carpet. The shrike did not turn. Its back was no more reassuring than its front, with the exception that its dull red eyes no longer were watching us. Aenea sighed and walked up to the thing. She raised one small hand, but did not actually touch that spiked and razor-wired shoulder. Turning back to us, she said, "It's all right. Let's go." "How can it be all right?" I whispered fiercely at her. I don't know why I was whispering, but for some reason it was next to impossible to speak normally around that thing. "If it was gonna kill us today, we would be dead already," the girl said flatly. She walked to the port side, her face still pale and shoulders drooping, and picked up one of the poles. "Cast off the lines, please," she said to Aebetic. "We have to go." The android did not flinch as he walked within monster arm's length of the shrike to untie the forward line and curl it into a loop. I untied our stern line with one hand while holding the rifle with the other. The raft rode lower with the mass of the creature on the front end, and water lapped across the boards almost back to the tent. Several of the front and port side logs were hanging loose. "We need to work on the raft," I said, taking the steering oar in hand and laying the rifle at my feet. "Not on this world," said Aenea, still straining against the pole to move us out into the center current. "After we go through the portal." "Do you know where we're headed?" I said. She shook her head. Her hair seemed dull this morning. "I just know that this is the last day." She had said that a few minutes earlier, and I had felt the same stab of alarm then as I did now. "Are you sure, kiddo?" "Yes." "But you don't know where we're going?" "No, not exactly." What do you know? I mean," she smiled wanly. "I know what you mean, Raul. I know that if we survive the next few hours, we hunt for the building I've seen in my dreams." "What does it look like?" Aenea opened her mouth to speak, but then just rested against the pole a moment. We were moving quickly now in the center of the river. The tall downtown buildings gave way to small parks and walkways on either bank. "I'll know the building when I see it." She laid the pole down and walked closer, pulling at my sleeve. I bent to hear her whisper, "Raul, if I don't make it, and you do, please get home to tell Uncle Martin about what I said, about the lions and tigers and bears, and what the Corps is up to." I grabbed her by the thin shoulder. "Don't talk like that. We're all going to make it. You tell Martin when we see him." Aenea nodded without conviction and went back to the pole. The shrike continued to stare ahead, water lapping at its feet and the morning light beginning to glint on its thorns and razor surfaces. I had expected us to move into open desert beyond the city of Mashhad, but once again my expectations were mistaken. The riverside parks and walkways grew more luxuriant with trees, everblues, deciduous old earth varieties, and a proliferation of yellow and green palms. Soon the city buildings were behind us and the wide, straight river was passing through a rich forest. It was still early morning, but the heat of the rising sun was very powerful. The steering oar was not really needed in the central current. I lashed it in place, took off my shirt, folded it on top of my pack, and took the port push-pole from the obviously exhausted girl. She looked at me with dark eyes, but did not complain. Bettick had collapsed the micro-tent and shaken out most of the accumulated sand. Now he sat near me as the current moved us around a wide bend and into an even deeper tropical rainforest. He was wearing the loose shirt and ragged shorts of yellow linen I had seen him in on Hebron and Mare Infinitus. The broad-rimmed straw hat was at his feet. Surprisingly, Aenea moved to the front of the raft to sit near the motionless Shrike as we drifted deeper into the heavy jungle. "This can't be native," I said, straightening the raft as the current tried to swing it sideways. "There can't be enough rainfall in this desert to support all this." "I believe it was an extensive garden area planted by the Shia religious pilgrims, Endymion," said Bettick. "Listen." I listened. The rainforest was alive with the rustle of birds and wind. Beneath these sounds I could hear the hiss and rattle of sprinkler systems. "Incredible," I said, "that they'd use precious water to maintain this ecosystem. It must stretch for kilometers."
"Paradise,"
said Aenea.
"What, kiddo?" I pulled us back to the center current.
"The Muslims were primarily desert people on old Earth," she said softly. "Water and greenery was their idea of paradise. Mashhad was a religious center. Maybe this was to give the faithful a glimpse of what was to come, if the teachings of Allah and the Quran were obeyed."
"Expensive sneak preview," I said, dragging the pole a bit as we turned again to the left as the river widened. "I wonder what happened to the people."
"The packs,"
said Aenea. "What?" I did not understand. These worlds, Hebron, Comriad, were under ouster control when the population disappeared.
"According to the packs,"
said Aenea. I thought about this.
"What do the two worlds have in common, Raul?"
she said. It took no time to answer that. They were both adamantly non-Christian, I said. They refused to accept the cross, Jew and Muslim. Aenea said nothing. "That's a terrible thought," I said. My stomach hurt. "The church may be misguided. The Pax can be arrogant with its power, but—" I wiped sweat out of my eyes. "My God," I said, struggling to say the one word. "Genocide?" Aenea shifted to look at me. Just behind her, the Shrike's bladed legs caught the light.
"We don't know that," she said very quietly, "but there are elements of the Church and of the Pax that would do it, Raul. Remember, the Vatican depends almost totally on the court to maintain its control of resurrection, and through that, its control of all the people on all the worlds." I was shaking my head. "But genocide? I can't believe it." That concept belonged with the legends of Horace Glennon Height and Adolf Hitler, not with people and institutions that I had seen in my lifetime. Add Bibi Netanyahu to that list. Something terrible is going on," said Aenea. "That has to be why we were routed this way, through Hebron and Comriad." "You said that before," I said, pushing hard on the pole. "Routed. But not by the core. Then by whom?" I looked at the back of the Shrike. I was pouring sweat in the heat of the day. The looming creature was all cool blades and thorns. "I don't know," said Aenea. She swiveled back around and rested her forearms on her knees. "There's the Farcaster." The portal rose, vine-shrouded and rusted, from the overgrown jungle. If this was still Comriad's Paradise Park, it had grown out of control. Above the green canopy, the blue sky carried a hint of red dust clouds on the wind. Steering for the center of the river, I laid the pole along the port side and went back to pick up my rifle. My stomach was still tight with the thought of genocide. Now it tightened further with the image of ice caves, waterfalls, ocean worlds, and of the Shrike coming to life as we passed into whatever waited. "Hang on," I said needlessly as we passed under the metal arch.
The view ahead of us faded and shifted as if a curtain of heat haze had begun to shimmer ahead of us and around us. Suddenly, the light changed, the gravity changed, and our world changed. And that is where we will call it for today. We will read the next chunk tomorrow, mañana, which is going to be a bit longer than this one was, but not tremendously long. It has a hell of a little epilogue chapter. And after tomorrow, we will be on to the sequel novel, The Rise of Endymion. So we've got quite a bit of reading left to do before we can move on to other pastures. But this one's a fun romp, so it's worth it. Alrighty, so I think that'll do it for today. Let me hit the button there. Anything else salient? When I know my schedule for next week, I'll post it in the Discord. I still have to change the YouTube channel's channel description so that it does not say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because that is not really going to be what's happening, unfortunately. Regrettably, things are crazy and unsettled. If I can get a steady schedule, it'd be great, but I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. Anyway, seems that I'm forgetting something. Oh, right, the cover art. The cover art. Give me a sec. Give me a sec. Which is this one entitled Endymion cover art. That's not tremendously helpful. Give me one sec here. I do know the artist, or I had it written down somewhere. I don't have it. Huh. It's not in the folder. I thought I notated this down. Maybe I put it someplace goofy. There we are. Search by image. Here we go. I don't want the image itself. There we are. Dee-da-dee-da-dee-dum. Where are you? Here we go. Huh, it's not there. Bear with me. Gary Ruddell. Or Ruddle. Ruddell. He is the one who did the cover art, and it is gorgeous. It's very pretty. You have the Shrike standing there. They're on their damaged, truncated raft in the jungly area. It shows the Farcaster cleanly, even though it's overrun with plants. I don't think the planet they're going to is necessarily indicative of God's Grove, but if you assume that all the spiky things in the background there are destroyed giant trees, then yes, it could be. So yes, Gary Ruddell, apparently. It's a good one.
Anyway, with that, I'm going to call it good. Let me just write the name in chat. Gary. Anyway, that'll do it for today. I will see you all tomorrow, hopefully. Otherwise, if you're just listening to these after the fact and not live, then whenever you listen to it next, which could be in mere moments, it could be in days, I don't know. I have asked this question before, but and I just kind of like to gauge the listening public for their responses. Do people prefer the longer form where I go like 2 to 3 hours of straight reading through, or would they prefer it to be shorter blocks? I can go either way. I'm just kind of interested to know what people prefer. I know a bunch of people have said the longer is fine. There are certain physical constraints on me, both in terms of my time as well as literally what my weak corpus can withstand, as it were. Talking for like 3 hours straight is a real kick in the teeth. It's kind of draining, especially if the book is like really exciting, because like my heart rate will increase dramatically. We will have quite a lot of heart rate tomorrow. It is excitement o'clock. We're getting a mighty confrontation that will change the tenor of the rest of the adventure permanently. Who could die? Who knows? It's something I'm learning, because I've never really been big on horror literature, but something I'm beginning to gather, now that I've read more of it lately, is that a recurring theme in some of the better horror literature is a willingness to foreshadow very aggressively, and then do something that kind of twists the script on that foreshadowing, where you are prepared with the tension and dread of this coming bad thing, but then something interesting occurs that makes it somehow more horrible, or more horrifying, and we are going to have lots of that. So it is Endymion and Fall of or Rise of Endymion are an interesting example of a linear narrative occurring, being told in a linear fashion, that has events occurring that events that occur depend on events that are non-linear. Really, the whole Hyperion Cantos is like this. It's dependent on certain things occurring that haven't occurred yet, but will occur, to kind of broadly explain what's going on. There's going to be a scene like 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the final book. The ending of The Rise of Endymion feels kind of rushed, to be honest. A lot happens in an extremely short period of time. But there's a scene shortly before the ending of that's very big, that is going to throw so much at you as a reader. It throws a lot. It's like, oh, here's all the notes. Here's all the notes. Here's all this stuff you thought was going on that isn't going on, that you thought you understood that you definitely didn't. And it's kind of rude, to be honest, but it does make things exciting. Lots of recontextualization occurs. Some of it matters, some of it's like, well, okay, how does that really change the end result? But a lot of it is pretty interesting reveals. Anyway, with that, I'm going to call it. I will see you all tomorrow with the final installment of Endymion by Dan Simmons. Alrighty. Toodaloo. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other and stuff.